Jackie, over to you.
That's great. Thank you, Stuart. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to see us this evening to hear a little bit about the Victoria Park project. You are, in fact, my fellow ambassadors. I did well before I started working at this project, join the ambassadors. So I haven't had a chance to do any of these meetings yet, but I'm happy to be here for sure. So I want to really just tell you about the Victoria Park project, what we're going to be doing, and hopefully how you'll be able to support it and get involved, either as, you know, in your ambassador's role or as individuals. So I'm sure you are all well versed with local Portsmouth history. The park was opened way back in 1878, and at the time it was actually called the People's Park. So it has a really strong history of sort of like, you know, being in the city and being part of the lives of daily people for over 140 years. We've got project funding for a year from the National Lottery Heritage Fund to really find out about how we can preserve, restore, uncover and develop the history and, you know, the park as a real central point in the city. So you can guess that coming from the Heritage Lottery Fund, it's very much looking and thinking about how we can preserve the history and bring it back into life. So that's not just the monuments, although they're very, very important. Some of the naval memorials in the park tell a huge story about the movement of British sort of like ideas and travel around the world. And also of the sailors who went on those and never returned to their homes. There's also things like the Centenary Fountain, which is in the centre of the park, and we'll be like looking into that and trying to restore it back to some kind of former glory. But the park itself is a heritage site because it was designed by Alistair Mackenzie, and he was a very famous a landscape architect of the time. So the way that the park's laid out also tells you something about how the Victorians thought that people should use it. So, for example, people weren't allowed to walk on the grass. They were expected to walk around the paths as they were laid out. There was a bandstand in the park, but people weren't allowed to dance around it. It was all very well controlled, and it took about 45 years for the council to eventually say that they would agree to people dancing at the bandstand. So a lot of that history is social history. It's about how people used it and how people were expected to use it over the course of time. Moving a bit more recently, if we think about how it's been, I was just chatting to a couple of the ambassadors earlier saying about the swimming pool, but just near that spot, during and slightly after the war, there was a British restaurant in that part of the park as well. And that was where families who had been kicked out of their homes during the Blitz, who had been bombed out of their homes, were able to go for a meal. And outside of the ration system, were able everyone was able to go and access a relatively like cheap meal to keep them going. So there's all sorts of things that we can think about in terms of history and heritage and how we might explore that through the project. The park is also very much about the people who use it, and we want to make sure that these days it's accessible to everyone. So that's local people who live within a sort of like 20-minute walk from the park itself, people with perhaps learning disabilities or mental health problems, people who don't ordinarily access open spaces because of barriers that exist to them or because of perceptions of the place not being a safe place. So we really want to get in touch with local people and find out what it is that they would like to see happen in there. And the third part is really around well-being. So these days, more than ever, parks are places of trying to get some health for people when they've been in their houses during COVID. We know that park and open spaces uses has gone up. But well-being is also about being connected to other people. So joining in volunteering, being part of something and enjoying things within the sort of like the centre of the park. So much of that is then can lean towards things like physical activities, but other things as well, like community gardening projects or having taking advantage of some of the nature that's in the park and doing some work and workshops around that for adults or for children. So the project is quite expansive in terms of all the things that we could consider. We've got a year to come up with a plan to take back to the National Lottery and to say these are the things that local people in Portsmouth are interested in doing around the heritage, around the people who use it, and around health and well-being. So in order to do that, we will probably put some investment into infrastructure as well, so that those activities and people could be supported. So the chances are we'll have some kind of central hub in the middle of it, so a new building that will go into the central section of the park, and we'll be asking people whether they think that that's necessary, and what kind of design will be in keeping with the park, so not to impact too much upon what's already there, but to complement it. We probably will put in some kind of bandstand area again, so social events can happen when we're all back and able to do that in a nice outside environment. And so we want to ask people, what kind of events would you want to see from that? We're very fortunate we've got some consultants working with us on these, so they are the experts in activities, in interpretation, so that's about what information you put in the park and how it can be displayed and designed, especially in modern ways, for people to be able to access the information. We've also got architects who are both landscape architects and physical building architects, so they'll be supporting us in this work as well. Lots of people in Portsmouth have a really emotional connection to the past because they have family pictures of them going down there with their grandma, of feeding the birds, of being around at the swimming pool, and all of those other things. So we're really trying to reach out and connect with people about their love of Victoria Park and to try and bring that really back into focus. In September next year, we'll be putting our bid back into the lottery, and that will be for a £2 million lottery bid to then support the work that we're developing the ideas for in the course of this year. So we'll be having consultations. The first of them will be starting this week. And that's very high level, really just saying to people, what is it? Do you use the park? If you do, what do you love about it? If you don't, why don't you go? And what would you like to see there in the future in terms of facilities and activities going on that support heritage, people and well-being? Then comes sort of like the new year, we'll be going out and doing some focus groups with target communities, and then hopefully in the springtime having a much larger event, which will be a physical event, we hope, back in the park, where we'll start to test out the ideas of what people have been telling us and how we can turn those into a bid that will get support from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So this evening, really, what I'm asking for is to get you involved in it, to think about whether, when the Facebook page comes out, we'll have the survey out on the Facebook page and also a link through the council website. So to ask you to do that, to ask you to tell other people about it. And then as we go along, just to be in touch with us and letting us communicate through you to the wider community in Portsmouth about the progress of the project and what stage we're at to gather people's views.